In this tutorial, we're going to go through some basic Photoshop principles as well as how I applied them to this particular cover design. And we'll talk about layering and drop shadows and font styles and a whole bunch of different things, as well as going through the Photoshop basics so that you have an idea of how to get started if you've never seen Photoshop before or if you've never touched it, right? And then we'll also talk about how to use our different sizes or create our different sizes, because you've got your ebook cover that you need to create, and then you also have hardcover and paperback covers that are going to be different sizes based on page count. That will increase the thickness of the spine and where we can go to find those dimensions to create our different versions. So let's go ahead and get started and just create ourselves a new file. We're using a 6 by 9 inch. And then once I complete my cover design, I'll move it around and resize it to create my ebook cover and to create a paperback as well. Now the resolution, you want it to be 300, and you can bump it up. Sometimes I like to do that because I don't like my photos or my pictures coming out blurry at all, but it's not necessary, especially for a print book. And actually, if you bump the resolution up too high and you have a really big document when you export it, then it's actually going to make it harder and slower for the printer to print your cover. So 300 is a pretty safe bet. Now, the color modes here, RGB color is for screens and CMYK color is for print. So we'll stick with CMYK color, although sometimes I start with RGB color because your ebook will be on a screen, technically speaking. But that's okay for now. And everything else, we don't need to worry about that necessarily. Sometimes what I do as well is I'll create my document to be a lot bigger than this to start off. So as you can see, I've got some of my custom designs here. I'll do a 24 inch by 36 inch cover, and that just gives me a lot more resolution. Basically, it gives me a nicer quality photo, and it's a lot easier to downsize a photo than it is to upsize a photo. If you try to upsize it, you're going to get a really pixelated photo. So, and what I did here, as you can see, I just multiplied 6 by 4 and I multiplied 9 by 4. So I got 24 by 36. Okay, but we'll start with 6 by 9 for the sake of this tutorial. Click create, and you've got your cover here. Then after that, we're going to need to pick some images that we want to work with. So let's say that we're going to have a girl on our cover. Now, I really like to use pixels because there are free images on here that you can use and you don't have to pay for them. Unsplash is another great resource that you can use for free images. There's a couple others, but those are the two main ones that I use, are Pexels and Unsplash. So let's say we're gonna I'll just look up girl and pick a model for our cover. This one I think is pretty cool. So let's do this one and say free download. Then when you do create the interior front cover for your book, then it's usually nice to include some photo credits to the people who put these photos on Pexels in the first place, and just give them some credit. So we'll come over to Photoshop, and then we're going to say File, Open, and I'm going to go to my downloads and open that download. So I still have my ebook cover here, or my book cover. Then here I have the photo, and let's talk about a few different ways that we can mess around with this photo. So first of all, if I want to just take out the background and I want to have just her standing out, there's many different ways that we can do that. One of the quickest ways is to come over here, unlock the photo, unlock the layer, scroll down under your Properties tab, then say Remove Background. And as you can see, it actually does a pretty good job with removing the background. If you zoom in a little bit, which if you hold down Command or Control, then the plus key on your keyboard, it'll help you zoom in. And it does a pretty good job. The outer edges of the hair are typically the hardest things to work with, and they don't always look super great with the automatic background removal. And I'm not actually going to go into depth on how to fix that right now because that requires a whole other video and it takes a long time. So we'll stick with this for now. Now another option, if we just undo that, so I say Control or Command Z, and that undoes what I just did. And let's play around with the pen tool here. Now if you right click on the pen tool, it's going to give you several different options. The pen tool here, that's just a plain pen tool, is going to give you very angular shapes, as you can see. Or if you click and hold, so I'm still holding, hold, and pull out, you see these cool little lines that are coming out on either side. And this is really good for making very accurate selections and making sure that your curves line up, because most pictures you cut out are not going to be angular like this. And then you can click on the handlebars here and make adjustments. Anyways, there's all sorts of stuff you can do with that. Let's undo all of that. But the pen tool that I actually like to work with the most is the curvature pen tool here. Freeform pen tool is just, it allows you to draw basically like this, so you can make a really fast selection. The lasso tool here does something pretty similar, but see, it's making a selection. And we can actually turn the work we do with our pen tools into selections. So let's say that I'm using the freeform pen tool and I do that. Then I can come over here to paths and then come down here to the dotted icon, and it makes it a selection. And then I'm gonna hit V. V just changes it to the selection tool up here, and then I can move around the piece that I just cut out. So that's kind of cool, but we don't actually want that right now. Let's come back to the pen tools. Click on the curvature pen tool. This is the tool that I like to use the most when I'm trying to make a manual selection. And it basically does the same thing as this pen tool when you hold down a button and you get the curves, right? Except it kind of does it for you. And you have to play around with it a little bit to understand what it's doing. But essentially, you know, see if I'm clicking around, you can see that it's making curves instead of making angles when I just click. I'm not clicking and dragging. If I click and drag, it moves the point. So you see these nice curves that it's making. Let's undo that. And if I zoom in a little bit, again, that's Control or Command plus on your keyboard. Generally, you'll click a point and then you want to make your next point at the peak of the curve. So see, there's a curve right here on her head. So I'm going to make a point here and then about the same distance from here. Like I said, you're going to have to play around with it a little bit to understand how these curves work. But you know, if you put it in the wrong spot, you can always adjust it by moving your points. And that's pretty easy. So I'll just come around here, and if you double click, with this one I just double clicked instead of clicking once, then it's going to make a hard angle. See how it makes a hard angle instead of a curve? So this tool for me is really easy to work with, and I use it a lot more than I use the other pen tool. Okay, now let's talk about some adjustment layers that we have. So if we go back to layers here, there's several different options we have down here. This one here is for shapes and text, so we won't touch that one yet. This one here is for making a mask, which we haven't done anything that would make us a mask, so we don't need that tool quite yet. But just to show you how the mask tool works, if I were to make a selection, so we'll come up to the lasso tool and just make a selection like this, right? And then I click the mask button here, then it removes everything outside of that selection. You see that? And then if I hold down Shift and click on the mask right here, then it will disable the mask and I can see my regular picture again. And when you export this picture, if you have your mask disabled, then your export's going to look like this. It's not going to think, oh, you disabled your mask, but you still have a mask, so let's export the mask. It won't. Whatever you see on the screen is essentially what you're going to get when you export your picture. But let's get rid of that mask for now. Now another option, sometimes I have trouble getting rid of these marching ants here. So if you right click on it and say deselect, then they disappear as well. Okay, so we talked about the mask tool a little bit. Now right here is where you can add a lot of adjustment layers. You can also come up here to the adjustments tab and use some of these as well. But let's work in layers for now. And the reason why it's really nice to work in layers is you're not changing your original photo. You still have access to this. So let me show you what that means exactly. So let's say I add a hue and saturation layer and I make it this green purple color. And then I add a color balance layer and I make it more green and more cyan. And obviously these are really ugly, but you know, we're just changing it up. Okay, now say I want to know or remember what my original photo looks like. If I turn off the eyeball icons here, then voila, I still have my original photo. It's still there. And you can do the same thing by just making a copy of this layer here. If I click, hold, and drag to the plus button, then it makes a copy. And then you can turn off the visibility for your original layer, but it's still there. So you have your original photo. And if you're making edits to this photo directly, then that's okay, because all you have to do is turn off the visibility and turn back on the visibility of your original photo, and then you still have access to that original photo, which is really smart. Believe me, I've made the mistake of just editing on my original photo and then not reserving a copy for myself, and then I had to make edits after that and undo stuff, and I couldn't undo it because I'd already saved it and exited it out of Photoshop. So that was really a pain, and I basically had to redo a lot of work. So definitely make sure you have a copy of your original photo and of any changes that you may want to go back to. So let's go ahead and go back to where we were without these layers. Okay, so we're back to our original layer, and let's start with the solid color here. Okay, we'll just go through each of these. Now the solid color is useful for a lot of different things, but you know, let's pick this color here and just say, okay, now if you change your blending mode with this solid cover, then, so see, normal is going to completely cover up your photo, but there's all these different blending modes and they're going to change the color of your image. So you can kind of play with these and just take a look at them, see which ones you like, which ones are going to give you the effect that you want. I'm not going to go over each of them in detail because really you can just look at them, just go through each of them one by one as I'm doing and take a look at the different effects that it creates basically. So see, lots of really cool options. And this is really fun, a fun mode to use, this blending here when you're adding texture to your photo, which we will also discuss later. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of our color layer. Now let's not worry about gradient and pattern right now because those are just overlays that affect the texture essentially. Let's go to brightness and contrast. This is a very simple one. So you can adjust the brightness of your photo. A lot of times photos need to be brightened up a little bit. I mean, this one looks pretty decent. Then the contrast, you can deepen the shadows and colors or lighten them up. Pretty self-explanatory. Let's get rid of that layer. Now another way to get rid of a layer that you don't want anymore, you just click, hold, and drag to the trash can. Okay, now let's try another one. This is levels, and levels is kind of like a manual way of adjusting contrast in a sense or affecting your lighting. But I say contrast because you're also affecting the colors here. So RGB, see this is a screen mode, right? Now if I take the bottom one here and I slide it up, as you can see, the dark colors, the shadows are getting darker. And I can pick a color. I can say the reds. I'm just going to darken up the reds. That's it. And it won't affect the other colors. But there aren't very many times that I have to use that. So we're going to go back to RGB. And you don't generally want to pull the bottom tab here past the first hill because then your colors start to look really funny. As you can see, that doesn't look very good. But just pulling this first slider to the beginning, to the base of the hill, gives you some really nice deep colors in your photo. And then same thing with the highlights as well. You don't want to pull it way in here because then you get really overexposed, but pulling it in just a little bit. With this one, I wouldn't actually pull it in very much because you've got these little hills here, but pulling it in just a little bit will brighten up some of your highlights. Then this slider here is for midtones. And I don't generally mess with that very often. If you wanted a lighter photo, you could bring it over here a little bit. If you want a darker photo, over here. But I'm not actually going to mess with that. Okay, so we played around with that level as well. This here, you're probably not going to use very often. Let's delete that layer and look at the next one. So we talked about levels. Now let's go to curves. Let's skip over curves for now and exposure, because some of those things really you can do manually with some of the stuff we've already talked about. So let's go to vibrance. Now, the difference between vibrance and saturation is this. When you change vibrance, when you adjust vibrance, it's not going to necessarily affect the entire photo. If you have a color that's already pretty vibrant, then it's not gonna change it very much. So there's not a lot in this photo that's already super vibrant, but you can see kind of the colors in her hair are pretty vibrant. Her shirt and her pants kind of are, but even when I adjust the vibrance, those colors do become more vibrant as well. But it's always kind of fun to turn up the vibrance a little bit. This photo, I'm sure, was already edited when I took it from Pexels, so it already looks really nice. I wouldn't actually change anything on here, but you can see what happens when I up the vibrance. Now the saturation, even if you have something that's already very saturated or already very vibrant, is still gonna up the saturation on that as well. So it's gonna really dramatically affect the colors for the entire picture. Whereas vibrance is gonna focus more on the colors that are not very vibrant. So you can see it's not as dramatic and it looks a little bit more natural. So it's not very often that you're gonna change the saturation. Let's delete that layer and take a look at the next one. Color balance. And this is helpful when you're going for kind of a more cinematic look, if you will. A lot of people will use more of this cyan and orange color scheme. That's very blue. And yeah, you can play around with this a little bit, but it just affects the colors of your image. And if you want it to be more monochromatic or have kind of a dual color scheme going on. Okay, black and white, that's pretty self-explanatory. It makes it black and white. And I did actually use this when I created this cover here, and I'll explain that later. Because as you can see, it's not black and white, but I had to use this filter. And the rest of these, we really don't need to worry about right now. I will show you gradient map and how it can pair up nicely with the black and white color filter, but for now, this is pretty good, okay? Now, let's pretend like we're gonna combine her with another image. And this isn't gonna look super good, but we're just gonna grab some random head. Great, we'll grab this one and just download it, right? Don't forget to attribute to the photographer. Then again, open and click on the one you just downloaded, then it opens it. Now let's go ahead and remove the background on this manually for the sake of speed. Unlock the layer, scroll down under quick actions, remove background. Okay. And then I'm gonna use the selection tool here to get rid of some of the stuff that I don't want, because we're just gonna take her head. And like I said, this is really rough. It's not gonna look very good, but you'll get the idea at the very least. Keep her hair, I guess. Okay, I'm just selecting everything around her that I don't want to keep. And then paths, selection, and delete. Ta-da. All right, so then we're gonna take this image here. All right, I got my girl here. And if I want to combine her with this photo here, then I'm gonna click and hold and drag all the way up to here. Keep holding, drag and release. And I still have her over here, but now I have a copy of her in this photo. And you'll see that if your photo sizes are terribly different, obviously on your screen, the size of the photo doesn't look very different, but sometimes when you pull up a photo, it may be a really small photo. And then when you drag it over here, you end up with like this teeny tiny head, and then you have to resize it and it looks super pixelated, and that's kind of a mess. So try to work with similar sized photo qualities and stuff, but you can't always control that when you're looking for photos. And if I want to resize this, because obviously that doesn't look very good, then I have it selected. You can see the layer over here is selected. And I'm going to hold down Control or Command and T. Control T. And it brings up this little box here. I think it's called a bounding box. Then you can click and drag. Now with the newer versions of Photoshop, you can just click and drag. With some of the older versions, you have to hold down Shift and click and drag. Otherwise, it's going to look like this when you're trying to resize it. Now it's the opposite. When you hold down Shift, you get this. But when you don't hold down Shift, you just get a regular resizing, okay? And we'll resize it to be about the size that it should be for this photo. That still seems a little bit big. Oh, it looks really small. This is always a little bit tricky. Okay, that looks decent. Then let's go ahead and click on this layer here. Oh, by the way, if you have it in this transform box here, then you need to click enter, and then it'll allow you to do other things with your document. So I have this layer selected now, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the background on that one again. Then I'm going to use the eraser tool over here. Now my eraser tool isn't very big. Oh, gotta make sure this layer is selected. If I have this layer selected, it's not gonna erase this one, it's gonna erase this one. So this one is selected, and I have the eraser tool. It's not very big right now, so I'm not gonna get much done with it. If you click on your bracket key, the right bracket key, it'll make it bigger. The left bracket key will make it smaller on your keyboard. And as you can see, it's not erasing my other photo because that layer is not selected. So I'm just erasing this part of the photo. Okay, I'm going to click on V to go back to my selection tool, and then I can click and drag this over here. And I probably should not have deleted the neck because now she doesn't have a neck. Looks really funny, doesn't it? Okay, now I'm going to show you how to use the clone tool, and we can use the clone tool to kind of touch this up a little bit. Obviously the lighting is not perfect. There's a lot of stuff that's not going to look very perfect right now, but I'm just showing you how to use some tools. Let's click here to add another layer, and then click on the clone tool. Make sure this new layer is selected. Click on the clone tool. Then I'm going to make it, let's zoom in a little bit. Hold down the Alt key, and that's gonna, then you click on an area that you're gonna wanna drag. See how I just did that? So if I click here, you're gonna kind of select multiple times, and you're gonna be dragging parts of the image. So I Alt select color, 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 Alt select color. Now I might actually want to take her head and put it above this image or this layer here so that we're not getting, I want to color on top of the head. I want to color underneath the head, right, to fill up this space here. So back to the clone tool, Alt select, I forgot to select my layer. Okay, Alt select, color, and I'm just filling up this space here. And this is really rough, but if you do it a little bit more carefully, you can have actually some pretty nice coloration. You really got to play around with it a little bit. You can decrease the size of your tool as needed. Okay, and if there's like some specific small touch-ups that you need to do, you can always come to your brush tool or click B on your keyboard. Brush tool, same thing, Alt, hold down Alt to select a color. So if I'm going to select this darker color here, then I can use the brush tool to paint, see, like that. Obviously it doesn't look very good, but shows you how it works. Then you can change the opacity of your brush if you just want to change something a little bit. So say I have 50% opacity, and then it's not gonna create as dark of an overlayer. See, it just kind of darkens it up a little bit. Now, something to be aware of when you're using this tool is when you click and hold and then color, you're creating this nice even translucent layer. But then if you click again and color over top of that translucent layer, then you're adding layer on top of layer and it gets darker, as you can see. Just something to be aware of. Then let's take our clone tool and select some of her hair and fill that in the background a little bit. Now with this, obviously you have to play around a little bit because you don't want it to all look like you literally took a stamp and then stamped it over and over again. It doesn't look very good. And as I said, this isn't super accurate right now. We're just kind of practicing using the tools. Now that we've covered some basic tools that you use in Photoshop, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that I used, or some of the things that I did to create this cover. The first thing I'm going to talk about is font. And with fonts, oh my word, there are thousands and thousands of different fonts that you can choose from. But what I really love to do is take a look at other covers that are in a similar genre and look at the fonts that they use. And one of the things that I actually did with my husband recently, we went on a date to Barnes & Noble and it was really fun. We just looked around at all the different cover designs that people did. We looked at the fonts they used, what shading they used, what colors they used, what styles they used, and that was really helpful. That was a very helpful exercise, so I recommend doing that as well. But I just chose, this one here is called Tomaric, and I got that through Adobe Fonts. So if I come over here to my Creative Cloud, just, this is where all my apps are together. It's a Creative Cloud app that you can put on your desktop computer. Then you come down here to Fonts, Manage Fonts. And then if you say Browse More Fonts, they'll take you to a website where you can browse from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of fonts. And then you just click Activate. Here, let me show you how it works actually. So say Browse More Fonts. Then Then it comes to this website, and there's lots of different styles that you can look through. If there's one that you find that you really like, so you can come to brush pen here, say, oh, I like duos, that's pretty cool. Then you click view family, and then you pick which versions you want to activate. So if you need the bold version and the light version, make sure you activate both. You could activate all of these. Some of the font families will have slightly different styles within the font family itself. So that's how you find different fonts that are not already installed on your Photoshop drop-down list here. As you can see, I've experimented with a lot of different font styles, but this is the one that we decided on that we liked. Oh no, it changed it. There we go. We're back. Now, as you can see, this has a drop shadow behind it. So I'm going to actually go ahead and open up a new document so we can practice some of these skills. New, create. Okay. And then let's create a font. And let's make our title The Best Book Ever. And what I like to do is just create each word separately, because then I can move them around really easily and adjust them and position them. And I'm going to come down here to my first word and just duplicate it 3 times. So I have 4 copies of it, and then we can separate these out. That way this will be best book, oops, ever. Now, as you can see, in order for me to actually click on the next one, I have to kind of click out here. I kind of double click on the outside, or you can just come over here and click on your next layer that you need to edit to change the text, okay? And I'll play with these a little bit. I usually like to make a little bit smaller than the rest of the font. Now, in order to change this, I click on it or click on the layer over here, but I'm just clicking on it on my page. Click Control or Command T and pull it out to make it bigger. We can move it around, and I'm not going to make this perfect by any means, but just some general principles. You don't necessarily want it to look super symmetric. So if you have everything in the center of your page, like, I'm hitting Command or Control Z to undo. Enter when I'm done transforming. Okay, so if I have everything kind of looking like this, sometimes that style looks okay, but most of the time it doesn't look very eye-catching or appealing. It just looks really, like, I don't know, mainstream. It's kind of boring, right? It's kind of dull. But if you can kind of play around with it and, you know, make it look a little bit asymmetric. And I just clicked and dragged to select all these layers at the same time. Then I'm hitting Control T so I can change the size of it all together and move it around. It can be in the center. Usually you want it kind of in the top third or the bottom third. Center is sometimes okay, but I usually put it about the top third. Click Enter. So see, that looks a lot more interesting than just having everything straight down the center. Now I'm going to go ahead and group these so I can edit them all together, because I don't want them all to have different text effects. But just before I do that, one more thing to keep in mind is generally your smaller words should be bolded so they kind of match the thickness of your bigger words. So these ones won't be bolded, these ones will be bolded. I don't actually have a bolded version of this, so we're just going to keep it as is, but it looks nice anyways. So again, clicking and dragging to select all the layers. You can also do that by coming over here to the layers and click on each. So click on that, then hold down Control or Command and select, select, select. Or you can hold down the top one, hold down Shift, click on the bottom one, and it'll select everything in between. Okay, and then we're going to drag these, drag down to the folder here, and it becomes a group. Now, since it is a group, I can edit it as a group, and it's going to affect, any edits that I make are going to affect all of these layers together, which is really nice. And I'm going to come down here to this little FX. This is going to be our text editor. or style editor, and let's add a drop shadow. And it's going to pull open this here, which is awesome. You can play around with it a ton. Drop shadows don't always look good on your book cover. As you can see, I added a drop shadow on this one, and it helped make the text pop a little bit. If I took away the drop shadow, let's see what that would look like. Oh, actually, I did an outer glow. But it's very similar. Just, I can make the outer glow look like a drop shadow. I can make the drop shadow look like an outer glow, just depending on how I adjust the settings. So if I take that away, see, it just doesn't stand out very much from the background. And as you can see, I also added drop shadows behind this element here and behind this element here. And it just makes everything look layered, and it gives it this really nice depth with this particular cover design. So again, we're clicking on our group, select the group over here in your layers. So the whole group is selected. Click on the FX, click drop shadow, and well, it should have created a drop shadow. I wonder if it just took some of our settings from the other page. So let's bring it back to black. Whoa, yeah, it did. Okay, black, and the opacity you can change. You can make it lighter. That's actually a really cool drop shadow. I really like that. Anyways, darker. That looks really cool. Man, I might use this. Anyways, the reason why it looks like that is because of this, the contour. If you have the first one selected, it's going to give you more of a regular drop shadow one you're probably more used to, but you can play around with these. They all have different looks and feels about them. This one's probably the more common one that you're going to use. These contours tend to be more useful when you're messing with the bevel and emboss feature. So distance, you can see how that affects the drop shadow. Okay, usually it's nice to have it a little bit offset. In my cover, I did outer glow, so it was actually evenly around the edges. It didn't offset at all like this. Spread just makes it kind of spread out. Size. So you can just see what all these settings do. And that's pretty much all there is for drop shadow. In outer glow, you can do the same thing. Let's turn off drop shadow. And just change the color of the outer glow. And your blend mode, if you're not actually seeing the color show up when you do that, make sure your blend mode is set to normal. Some of these won't show up very well. See, if it's on overlay or like soft light, you're not going to actually see the color that you're picking. So normal is a good setting to have it at, and you'll actually be able to see it. Our opacity is pretty low right now, but we can up it, and then you get this really dark outer glow. It doesn't look very good, obviously, but you can play around. Now, another feature that's really useful, but I definitely did not use it for this cover because it wouldn't be very fitting. It tends to be more fitting for very bold books, or fantasy is kind of a big one, is bevel and emboss. Let's turn off outer glow so we can see this a little better. And again, with this one, you just really want to play around with the settings. Now, see how I had bevel and emboss checked, but I was down here in the drop shadow settings. So once I unchecked it, I'm still in the drop shadow settings. I have to click back on bevel and emboss so I can edit these settings here. And now we can pick some of these contours here and see what they look like. You can adjust which way the lighting is coming from. You can adjust the softness of that curve there. So with like fantasy, when you're trying to get this sort of metallic look, then you probably would not have it as soft. You'd probably have it a lot sharper. The size, you can see how that affects it. Sometimes this looks like chocolate to me. Like, look, it just looks like chocolate, especially if it's brown. Anyways, then the depth, you can see how that changes the style. Now it looks like bubblegum or balloons. That's kind of cool. Chisel hard, again, tends to be more of a fantasy-esque. If you're going for some sort of, I don't know, metallic look, or I don't know, it kind of looks like gemstones with this. chisel soft. Okay, so lots of different settings you can play around with. And that's pretty much all I need to know with that as well. Okay, so we covered the font here. Then creating these layers here, I'll just show you real quick. What I did with this foreground was what I was showing you earlier, where I basically combined characters, and then I had to apply a bunch of filters on top of them. I had to apply, oh, well, first of all, there was kind of a lot that went into this. I had to apply a black and white layer and a hue saturation layer, and I turned down the saturation all the way, and didn't do posterize. I think those are the two main ones. Oh, and a solid color layer. And then I came over here and I used the oil paint filter, and all of that actually I learned from another video on YouTube, so I'm going to link that video and pop it up here in the cards so that you can watch the full video if you want to know how to have this effect where it looks kind of posterized. But I just did that, and then I cut it out and I popped it into a new document, if you will, a new cover, so that I would be able to just that's my overlay, but move this around freely, this layer that I have here, and it wouldn't mess with anything. It just was the easiest option for me. Okay, and like I said, I added a drop shadow to this layer. I just explained how to do drop shadows. Now this shape right here, okay, I can toggle it on or off. That shape, I literally just drew it. So if I come back over here and I come down here to my pen tool, we've got the curvature pen tool, the regular pen tool. I like to use the curvature pen tool because I feel like it's really just, it's easy to use and I can do a lot with it. So for the sun part, I just clicked once, I clicked up in the center, clicked once down here, and as you can see, it creates a nice curve. You can kind of adjust it to make it look a little bit nicer. And then come back over here, and we don't want it rounded, so I'm going to double click this point and double click this point. Okay, see what happened there? And as you can see, it's not really making a shape, it's just making lines. That's because up here I have path selected, and if I say shape, it's going to make me start all over again. So make sure that shape is selected, and then we'll do the same thing. Double click, and adjust. And then we'll come over here and we can adjust the color. Just kidding, up here, fill. Okay, see how I clicked on that little rainbow box up here, and then I can move it around. Let's make a pink sun. Why not? Actually, let's make a blue sun. Okay, now it's blue. We don't want a stroke. That would not look good. So then we click enter. All done. I can click V, move it around. Now I'm just going to do this really quick and real rough for the sake of saving time. So click here, click here, click here, click here, double click. Okay, click here. Sorry, I gotta finish off my layer there. Double click. Okay, and we'll create another shape here. And what I did actually was copy this layer and I duplicated it. Okay, see how I just dragged it down, duplicated that layer, move it, Control T, Command T, and then rotated it a little bit like this. So then those shapes all end up being kind of uniform. Okay, I'm not going to create any more than that because you get the point. This looks like it has a stroke though, doesn't it? Let me make sure it doesn't have a stroke. It does have a stroke. No stroke, I don't want a stroke. No stroke. And no stroke. All right, we got rid of the strokes. Perfect. Stroke is just the outline. Now I'm going to select all these layers by clicking on this, holding down shift, clicking on this one, clicking on this one. You can do the same thing over here, right? Now I can move them all around together, and then I can either group them together by pulling them down to the folder, or there's this other option to merge your shapes, and that literally makes them into one layer. I don't think there's a way to undo this, so only do it if you are committed, if this is the shape you want, okay? I'm gonna move it underneath the text. That was not what I was wanting. There we go, underneath the text. And then I can add a drop shadow to this as well, which is what I did over here. Or my outer glow, I guess. I think I did an outer glow. Woo, that's a dark outer glow. Let's lighten that up. Okay, obviously it looks terrible, but we're learning things, right? And what else did I do? So that's pretty much what I did. Okay, so you can see how we're layering stuff, adding effects. And then right here, do you see what this is here? This is a texture that I added to the cover. And this is a lot of fun as well, and it can really transform your cover into something that looks somewhat juvenile in a sense, and can really take it to the next level. Because this looks really nice, and it looks very textured. I just like it. It adds a new element. And what I do is I go to Unsplash. You could also go to Pexels. Let's go to Unsplash for this one, and just type texture. You can type a whole bunch of different things. It really doesn't matter what you type. You can look for just about anything. And there's all these cool textures that are free to download and free to use. So say that I want to use this texture here. I'm going to download it. Come back to Photoshop. I'm going to place embedded. There's my download. Ta-da! Click enter. Now that's a new layer, and I want this, I could put it over top of my text and have the text layered as well. I'm going to keep it underneath the text, but we could move it around and see what it looks like. Now we're going to change the blending mode here. See how it says normal right now? Change it to multiply, or you could do lighten. Obviously that looks weird. So multiply, that'll cover up the whole background. There's overlay, and I am pretty sure for mine I actually did overlay. The option, the blending mode that I choose literally changes with every single cover that I'm doing, because it just has a different effect with every single photo that you use. So with this one, it actually looks best to do multiply. So we got multiply, and that looks kind of heavy to me, so I'm actually going to change the opacity of it. I'm going to take it down a notch, and then just kind of get this lighter texture. So over here, the picture, you can see down here the picture that I put on top of it. It was like this piece of parchment paper, and I put that on top, and then yeah, see, my blending mode is soft light. So if I change that, see, it just really doesn't look good. If I do multiply, it gets really dark, and I don't want it to be that dark. And the rest of these, they just really don't look good. Overlay didn't look very good. So soft light was the one that I went with, and that looked pretty good to me. See, that's what it looked like originally. And then soft light, you just get this nice texture on top. Let me just show you real quick how to create the paperback version of this, and then we'll wrap up. Now, in order to create your paperback version of the cover, you're going to need to go to KDP Cover Calculator. And as you can see here, I'm just clicking through the different stats on my book that I was creating a paperback for. And I went back to the Amazon page to see how many pages the book had, and then I entered that into the page count. so that we could get a dimension calculated for us. And as you can see up at the top, it shows you the size for your paperback cover. So I went back to Photoshop and then created a new document with those dimensions, so inches, and then it gave me a specific inches and height, width and height to enter in. And as well, when you go back to that KDP cover calculator, you can download the template, which I did as well, and then we'll upload the template to our Photoshop artboard here. You'll see here if I try to automatically place or upload my template that I just downloaded, it's not going to work because it got downloaded in a zipped file. So I need to go back to my file folder from my computer and click extract all up at the top, and then just save it to a new file. It doesn't really matter where you save it, just remember where you save it. And then it will create a file that is not zipped anymore. And then that file, I can go back to Photoshop and I can upload my document, my template, to the Photoshop artboard that I created. Now you can see it's got these pink borders around the edge, and these are telling me where I need to make sure that no text is hanging out, because especially outside that outer black line, that's what's going to be clipped off in the end. So we got to make sure that none of our image that's important falls outside of that outline, and then making sure that the text stays within the pink boundaries, or outside of the pink boundaries. That way we don't get anything clipped off. There's no risk of losing anything from our photo or from our text. With my paperback cover, I tried pulling all the layers from my ebook version of the cover onto the paperback version, and it just didn't work out very well. It was really hard to adjust everything. So I went back to the ebook cover and actually exported it as a picture, as a PNG, and then I took everything that was on my paperback cover here and just deleted it. And then I ended up placing instead the ebook cover that I had exported. So everything was nicely tied together and I didn't have to worry about layers moving around, and it just was a lot easier to work with. And as you can see, I first uploaded again, or placed my paperback template, and then I added the ebook photo on top. And like I said, this just made it easier for me. If you were creating a paperback version that had continued elements from the front cover, from like the ebook version, then you'd probably want to go ahead and paste the layers, because then you can play around with them some more, manipulate them, and have them wrap around the spine and the back side of your cover. Now with this one, I didn't really have any elements from the front that I wanted to continue or wrap around the book, and as you'll see, I ended up just creating a new back and spine. And when you line up the front image that you have, the dotted lines are kind of your guide, right? So like I said, the pink lines are where the text needs to be outside of, but the dotted lines was where I lined up the picture that I placed. And you can see me doing that there, lining it up and making sure everything is straight. Again, you can hold down Command or Control and then click the plus key on your keyboard to zoom in and just make sure everything is really neatly lined up, and size it to the correct size. If you do notice that some of your text is not where it needs to be, or when you expand your ebook image to the outer edges where the bleed is, and you notice that some important parts of the image are going to be cut off during printing, then you can just decrease it down to fit within the black line, the black border on that background layer there. And then you'd want to extend the image. So in this case, you wouldn't want to do what I did and just export the image from the ebook cover and then place it. You'd want to actually pull over all the layers and then let them extend to the outer edges where the bleed is. That way you're preserving as much of your cover as possible. Now here I just created the spine and the back, and there's not a whole lot of explaining that I need to do here that I haven't already done. So I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through this part. For the back of the cover, I wanted to have something to fill up that bottom space. So I went and grabbed a couple of wine glasses, just a picture of a wine glass, and then I went to Adobe Illustrator. I like to do a lot of my illustrations and stuff in Illustrator because the tools that they have just feel more intuitive to me and a little bit easier to use for doing handwork like this instead of doing them in Photoshop. So I took it to Adobe Illustrator. But you could do this in Photoshop as well. You would use the exact same techniques. You would just grab a photo that you want to use. And as you can see, I'm using the pen tool to create an outline. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. The one pen tool that I was just using originally is just the regular pen tool. And if you click and hold, then you can pull out these little handlebars and adjust the curve. But for me, it's actually a lot easier just to use the curvature tool, the curving pen tool, which is what I'm using here. And to me, that just feels a lot more intuitive. I've just gotten a lot more used to using that. So that's what you see me using here. And all I'm going to do is create an outline of this glass here, and then I'm going to add a stroke to it. And you'll see me do that as well. And I just made it a black colored stroke, and I made sure that there was no fill. So it's just going to be a transparent, empty center. And then I'm going to take 3 of these. So I'm going to just copy and paste it 2 more times, and then pull 3 of them together, and then make a nice little bow in the center. Now, as you can see, if I try to erase the center of this bow here, because I just want to clean it up a little bit, I don't want to have all the glass lines going through there, it has this weird little black outline that shows up when I release the mouse when I'm using the eraser tool. And the reason why is because it's basically moving around the edges of that glass and the bow. So this doesn't work super well. So I'm going to show you what I ended up doing. I just kind of estimated where the bow was going to end up, and then I cleaned it up a little bit after moving the bow. Then all there is left to do is to select this entire image that I just created, copy it, go back to my Photoshop, and then paste it. And as you can see, I pasted it as a pixel layer. And then I'm just going to move it around use my transform to resize it and place it where I want it to be. Again, transform is Control or Command T, and that will allow you to resize your photo. So there is your completed paperback cover. Now all there is left to do is to export this in the right format, and then you can upload it to Amazon KDP or wherever it is that you are publishing your book.